Drafting is not going to go anywhere. Like you will have always have lots of contracts that will come. It will not only be financial service related contracts, it will be technology contracts. Can be contracts which are related to bespoke specific transactions. So the variety will increase. There will be a lot of variations that you will see, but it's not going to go always. Lot of contract drafting work will be there in this domain.
So, guys, there are a few steps to preparing, but before we go into how to prepare, first you have to remember that you have to you have to first unlearn a few things to properly learn about fintechs, because, and this is coming from the huge amount of interactions that we regularly have with both experts as well as students in the field, that there is a misconception that fintech is an entirely new vertical or an entirely standalone vertical, which is not true at all. Because it, as we talked about it previously as well, it sits atop the intersection of the BFSI industry and the technology industry. So the basics of both these industries are things that you have to be aware of when you're learning about fintech. So when we are talking about a fintech company, so it has to be incorporated as a company at the end of the day, which means you do have to comply with the Companies Act. And thereafter, if you're going to lending, it may be covered under the Banking Regulation Act as well. It may be covered under the Payments and Settlement Systems Act. So you have to be aware of what your business is and what is the product or service that you are offering, and that will constitute your first step towards learning how to work in fintech entities. First of all, you have to be acquainted with the business and business model of the company you are aiming to work for. Once you have identified the specific business and business model, the products or services that your company, your entity is offering, after that you will go to your second step, which is identification of your applicable laws. Now, identification of the applicable laws depends entirely upon the kinds of products and services you are offering. Let us take Paytm for example. So Paytm is providing services in nearly all of the spheres that we mentioned today, which is why we did not use Paytm as an example in our slides, because it provides literally everything. All of the fintech services are provided by Paytm, which is why its legal team was facing some difficulties in complying with various requirements. And that is also the reason why different services of Paytm have been hived off in different entities. Paytm Mall is a different company now. 197 Communications, it is a different entity now. The Payments Bank, it is a different entity. So depending upon the product you're offering, you will have to identify the applicable laws. If say an entity like Policy Bazaar or an entity like Grow, they will have to comply with the Insurance Act, with other insurance laws such as the IRDA Act as well. On the other hand, when you're talking about entities in Investech such as Zerodha, you will have to comply with laws in the securities domain and in the capital markets domain. So your Securities Contract Regulation Act, the SEBI Act, all of these are things that you will have to comply with, along with all the all the processes, all the guidelines, directions that are dictated to you by the regulator as well. So similarly, your foreign exchange laws, intellectual property laws, stamping laws, banking laws, all of these become important, but contingent on the business and business model that you have identified. So that will be your second step towards getting to learn how to work in fintech law. The third and largely the final step would be developing the ability to delve deep, because these laws that I mentioned, these central union legislations that I mentioned, these would only form the basic foundation of your work in fintech law. These will be useful mostly as far as your first step of the work is concerned, which is your structuring of the business and incorporating your various entities and complying with various compliance and regulatory processes. So that is as far as your foundational knowledge will go. But then you have to delve deep and you have to ensure that all of the processes that are followed internally within the company are also compliant with other regulations that might be applicable to you. How will you delve deep after you have identified the various union legislations that are applicable to you. After that, again, on the basis of the business model you have identified, you will have to look at the various directions and guidelines that the regulators have provided, and within those direction and guidelines you will find additional x factors that will add to your work. So I'll give you an example. And yes, it is very important to keep track of the updates in this sector, because this sector is still growing and it has still not reached complete maturity, and because of that, changes are quite rapid. So if you look at any RBI guidelines related, whether to P2P lending or to prepaid payment instruments, you will find that they are updated almost every year, and sometimes even twice in a year. So it is very important to keep track of these updates and keep reading, keep following what is happening in the sector. So an instance I will give you uh, is that, so when you're talking about fintech lenders, so fintech lenders, and this will also acquaint you with some of the work that lawyers will do. So when you're talking about fintech lenders, you will have to draft loan agreements, you will have to draft security documents, and these fintech lenders usually outsource certain functions such as recovery, collections, and marketing. So to outsource these conditions, not only they have to comply with the various NBFC directions given by RBI, they also have to comply with the outsourcing guidelines. According to the outsourcing guidelines, they have to have an internal outsourcing policy in place in addition to the outsourcing agreement that the entity would sign with the service provider. And you cannot draft this agreement with the knowledge of contract drafting alone, with knowledge of contract law or banking law alone. You need to know that according to the RBI directions, you have to have certain clauses within the contract. And if you're not acquainted with those RBI directions, you will not be able to prepare an agreement that would stand the test of law. So you have to have a clause to allow RBI to inspect the documents and premises. You have to have a clause for localization of financial data, and you have to have a clause for a clause that ensures confidentiality of user data even when the contract has expired. So and this is just one example, and there are numerous other examples like this. This would be less than 1% of the entire gamut of activities that you would have to take up.